Zoning Board of Appeals. Tonight is Monday, March 15th. It is just after 7 p.m. And the case we have before us tonight is case number 0320. This is 55 SS LLC for the 40B comprehensive permit located at 51, 53, 55 Summer Street. And the topics that we're going to review for tonight are outstanding items mentioned in the memo of March 1st and any other discussions that are relevant. We're also going to give Attorney Murphy, who is counsel for the residents of South Walpole. They've hired counsel, and he's going to address the board for about 15 minutes. We will have time for public comment, but one of the requests that we have at this point is that any information that's presented to the board should be new and relevant and focused on where we are in the process. And where we are in the process is a draft decision has been made, and we're moving forward with that at this point. So, okay. If Ashley, first up, do any board members have any comments or question of where we're at this point? Okay. Amy Quessel, anything to add?
I do not. I actually agree that we need to allow Attorney Murphy to speak and then, determine the height. We have to figure that out.
Okay. Judy Barrett, any guidance from you on the 40B process here?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair. I think you were just fine.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, Ashley, can you admit Mr. or Attorney Murphy into this, and we'll meet Mr. Murphy.
Sure. All right, Mr. Murphy, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak now.
Hi, good evening. Dennis Murphy from Hill Law. Can everybody hear me? Thank you. I've been retained by the neighbors, including Erica Burden, who's a direct abutter at 1915 Washington Street. For those on the board who may not know me, you're very well advised. Town council is expert in these matters, as is Mr. Reardon and Judy Barrett, who hails from my hometown in Duxbury. I am late to the public hearing in this process, and I promise I will not take 15 minutes, but I do have some thoughts. 40B in Walpole, like anywhere, comes down to a negotiation, and you are at the crux of that negotiation right now. I can tell you, I represent and have for many years the city of Woburn. Woburn had a 640 unit 40B proposed on 75 acres, 53 of which were open space and wetland. The ZBA in your position, they more than cut it in half. They approved 300 units. It went to the HAC. HAC bumped it up to 420 just because. And it went all the way up to the state's highest court, and the state's highest court said that the zoning board got it right. When they said it can be no more than 300 units, it was no more than 300 units. My point in telling you that story is that in this negotiation, the most this developer will ever get is 300 units. You've heard, I believe, over a year's worth of public hearings from fire chiefs and from Sean, a half-mile long dead-end road, all kinds of local concerns that ought to prompt you to limit the density. The basis in this project is 1.2 million. I'm not a developer, but I'm pretty sure I could make that back with less than 300 units. I would think one thing that I hope everyone understands, this is actually two projects, and if it ever were to reach the HAC with respect to project economics, each of the two would be, they're separately subsidized, the ownership and the rental, each would be separately evaluated against different benchmarks. And so one of the things that I would respectfully suggest that in your consideration of the height limit on the two 6-story buildings, with 20 years of 40B, including the first 10 of it exactly where you are, not in Walpole, but in my hometown, on the ZBA hearing 40Bs, I've never once seen a 4-story building
There you go.
be uneconomic. It's never happened. So the fact that someone could claim that not one, but 2 6-story buildings is necessary to make a project economic is absolutely unprecedented. In fact, there is a precedent. I told you about it in Woburn. The guy went for 640. The town gave him less than half, and the state's highest court said the ZBA got it right. That's your benchmark. A couple of particulars, if I might. In the list of waivers, at the end of each one, there's what's been termed a global waiver. Get your red pen out and cross it out, please. No blanket waivers. The whole idea of 40B is that you've got to justify what zoning has to be waived by making an argument about why it makes the project unbuildable. If you give a blanket waiver, you're not doing your job. You're not actually engaging in the analysis required to understand zoning is positive law. It's not a toy to be just set aside. You've got to have a justification for waiving it. So point number 1 about waivers is please don't grant a global waiver. Point number 2, I would solicit the input of any of your town boards, staff, and other experts before you waive whatever their local bylaw protections are. So, for example, there are lots of waivers involving wetlands. This project will need an NOI from the Conservation Commission. Before you go throwing their rule book out the window, you ought to at least hear from the Conservation Commission about what effect a wholesale waiver of the stormwater bylaw or a wholesale waiver of their 25-foot non-disturbance zone would have. And it is absolutely within the board's power to say, show me a project that that doesn't violate the 25-foot non-disturbance zone. My final point, it's not often done, but
Nice.
I would suggest that that you could make a legal argument. This is a limited manufacturing zone, a zoning district in which residential use is prohibited. Under state law, Chapter 40A, Section 10, in order for a zoning board to grant a variance from the use, your local zoning bylaw must expressly permit that. It actually says, except where local ordinances or bylaws shall expressly permit variances for use, no variance may authorize a use or activity not otherwise permitted in a district. The Walpole zoning bylaw does not authorize use variances. This is a purely untested legal argument. I don't have a case for you because we haven't had it. If and when we do, and I win, the developer in a limited manufacturing district will get 0 units, 0. And that's because that residential use is not allowed under your bylaw. My apologies. I think Amy's following the argument. It is an untested argument. I throw it out there because in the world of 40B, there aren't often things on the board's side. This one, I believe, is, and I believe that that the board does have a strong legal position because it's not in a district that allows residential use under the bylaw. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, Attorney Murphy, thank you for your comments. And you had 3 points. Let me just address them for not only you, but also the public. Your request to have the blanket waiver removed, yes, Town Council has been very firm on that, and we agree with that. There's no blanket waiver. The next one, the solicit input from the boards. The zoning board, through the process of hearings, we have had input from Conservation Commission, the Board of Health, Water and Sewer, the selectmen as road commissioners, all the departments in town. This has been very well vetted through the different town boards and departments. And then finally, your final point about the argument that this is limited manufacturing zone, I find that interesting. And fortunately, we have Judy Barrett with us right here and Amy Questle. And I want to ask first, I want to ask Judy, have you seen a situation like this? First off, I know many situations where LM land is used for 40B. What's your thought on the idea of saying that it's not allowed under 40A, so it would not be allowed under 40B? Judy Barrett.
You know, I don't think I agree with Dennis, but I'll tell you, in a matter like this, where you've got testimony from an attorney, I would defer to Town Council on this. I think that's the appropriate response for me.
Okay, I just wanted to know if you knew of 40B cases, but that's fine. Town Council. Yeah, go ahead, Amy, please.
So, I actually would agree with Attorney Murphy. I don't know of a case that actually addresses this, but I do not agree with Attorney Murphy that that the board has any footing in this. So obviously, with regard to a 40B, they can seek waivers from any zoning bylaws. So clearly, there can be a waiver from the use, and so I think it's a non-starter, quite frankly. That's my opinion. But again, I don't know of an HAC. I do follow the HAC cases. I don't know of one that specifically speaks to this, but I definitely think it's a non-starter because the statute, particularly allows you to waive certain requirements of local bylaws. So if your local bylaw does not allow you to issue a use variance, there can be a waiver from that use variant. There can be a waiver from that, and then you can issue a use variance. I really don't see much traction with that.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Questle. Okay, Attorney Murphy, you've heard the response to those 3 things that you brought up. Any thoughts or comments on your end?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the board's diligence in all of this. The one point I would say on the variance issue, state law requires that a town affirmatively adopt a bylaw that allows you to issue use variances. Nothing in 40B gives this board the power to adopt a bylaw, only to waive it. So, yes, Attorney Questle is right. You have a lot of power to undo what is under your local laws. What you don't have the power to do is what the legislative body in Walpole has, which is to actually adopt a zoning provision that permits use variances. So my argument, and it is untested, I only raise it because this is the rare instance where there's a proposed housing development in an industrial district where residential use is prohibited. So the language in the statute says except where a local bylaw shall expressly permit variances. The Walpole local bylaw does not, and nothing under 40B allows you to create that local bylaw that would allow a use variance.
Okay, we understand the point you're making. We've heard from town council, and I know of many situations similar to what we're talking about here. So, but it's a point that the board can discuss and deliberate. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. So, Ashley, at this point, do you want to bring Mr. Hale in, or is he there?
Sure. I can add other people from the team as needed.
Okay, so at this point, I want to bring up a couple things. On Friday, we had a additional thing submitted by Omni about the roadway B, and it came in after Town Hall had closed, and we have not had a chance to have a response from the fire department on roadway B. So that's something that I think is still hanging out there. Also, Amy Quessel, we've already had a draft decision. It's been posted on the town website. Neighbors have taken a look at it so they can see what's been out there. I've already seen one comment that's come in, has to deal with really basically the profits, limiting it to 20% profit, which is already under the 40B law. But I do appreciate comments from people that have taken time to go through the draft decision. So I think really at this point, the big discussion we have is the height of the buildings. Town council, do you agree with that, or would you?
Yes, I do. So I'm a little bit.
Mr. Chair,
Hold on, Mr. Hale, town council was talking. Please don't interrupt town council.
So yes, so I'm at an impasse where I need to know from the board what the height is going to be, because the height obviously drives the decision with regard to certain units and the number of units, and so yes, I need to know.
Okay, Mr. Hill, good evening.
good evening. I was just going to request that Mr. Levine be added. That's all.
He is.
He's been added.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, so board members, at this point, we've seen this development from the beginning stages, when it was 4 stories. We know it's now gone up to 6 stories, and there's been concerns. We talked about this at the last meeting. So what are people's thoughts, and we have discussed this a little bit, what are people's thoughts and issues with this? And if you want to address it, please just say you want to go, and I'll recognize you.
I'll start, Chairman Lee. Yeah, so I think the board had a great discussion in the last hearing about the height of the buildings and the inclination toward, based on input from the fire department about the height of the buildings and whether those could be reduced. And I believe the applicant was, at least at that time, willing to consider it, a smaller building height for those 2 buildings. I guess my inclination is not to provide town council with direction as to how many units we want. I think, once the hearing's closed, we're still going to have an opportunity to deliberate as a board and decide, and we'll make amendments to the decision as that come out of that deliberation process. So I don't want to. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable just specifying a number and then living or dying with it, despite what we might discuss in our deliberations. So, but I think in general, I'd like to see the buildings definitely reduced in height.
Okay. Jane Coffey, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I still have grave concerns about the density here. We had a very good discussion in the last meeting about having those building be 6 drop to 5. I'm now hearing at the attorney Murphy saying that there's still a profit at 4. I indicated the last time that if the height of the building would be dropped, that I would be amenable to at least considering this. But I've got to be perfectly honest and candid. I still have a lot of concerns. The fire department still has concerns about their access, backing up and being able to turn around. They want all the roads to have circular turnarounds at the end, and I don't see that that's here. And I'll be perfectly honest with you. After looking at the fires in Lynn on that terribly windy day, all I could think about is the fire department was right there on the street, on the spot. This could be Walpole, where the fire department is trying to get in on a narrower road than normal if it was a public roadway. People trying to get out, truck trying to get in, and I have to tell you that I'm more and more leaning toward not supporting this, because I think the density in and of itself is just more than I feel is safe. And I'm not thoroughly convinced that the fire department is fully convinced that this is really a fail-safe. And for that reason, that's where I'm coming from with regard to the height of the buildings and the density in general. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane Coffey.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Hill.
Could I just make one comment?
Sure.
And that is that the fire department has given no testimony that this is unsafe. They just haven't. And so you can review a year's worth of testimony. They wanted emergency access and we provided it. And so there's I think just from a technical point of view, they have not said one time that it was unsafe. And we have addressed their turnaround issue, and there are no points at this point on the plan that don't have a turnaround issue. So I just want to correct the record, and I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond.
Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
I didn't mean to intimate in any way that the fire department has used the word unsafe. What I'm saying is, it seems a soft approval, if you will. Nothing here says that it was unsafe. By the same token, nothing here says that they are entirely happy with this. The width of the road in and of itself, picture fire truck going in there, wintertime, people parked on the street, snow on the sides of the street. That is something that the fire department doesn't need to address. It's something that I, as a member of this board, am charged to look at. And I still feel that it is not, in my mind, a very safe environment. I feel that way. When I looked at how quickly those buildings went up in Lynn, and the fire department was there in 5 minutes, right on the street with 3 other fire departments for multi-call, that could be Walpole. And I think it could be a disaster.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Suzanne?
I agree with everybody here on our board anyway, that it seems unsafe. It's one way in, one way out. I know we have the access road that won't even be opened until the fire department gets there, I feel. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if the HOA person is going to unlock it, but I don't know if that's going to do any good because no one's there to drive in till the fire department gets there. But I'm without a pro forma, I'm not exactly sure on how much the impact would be money-wise, but I just feel it's not safe. It's one way in. I'm not even sure how long the road is. Does anybody offhand know the length? It's far longer than any roads in Walpole now with one way. And I just feel that it needs to be addressed. It's unsafe.
Okay,
That's all
thank you, Suzanne. Drew Delaney, do you have anything to add?
Chairman Lee, you know, safety is the number one concern of approving a project of this magnitude. When you talk about 6 stories, and I think of the wood framing, and even though it's allowed by building code, it's a combustible material, and it's certainly something to address and think about the safety of the residents who might be living there. It's been expressed by the fire department of this town that there's other issues that are arising that are concerned for the project regarding the ability to respond to an issue like that. And, you know, we see day in and day out issues that arise from properties that are similar to this. And I strongly feel concerned for the safety of any potential resident that may be living in that unit. And I don't think it fits with the local area. And I would seriously request that the developer look at reducing the levels of those buildings. I'd like to see them lowered to, you know, 4 units, 4 levels, and or something that the fire department would feel more adequate with, certainly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delaney. Okay, so, and I also have the concerns about the height of the building, and one of the things that with town council, it sounds like, you know, you want us to give a number tonight, and go ahead. I think we've discussed it. We all have concerns about the heights, but like Bob said, Bob Fitzgerald, I don't want to get locked into saying it should be this height or that height. I think we should deliberate and, you know, discuss it. But what do you need from your position as town council?
I have what I need. What I needed was that 6 stories is too high.
Okay.
And so I think that's clear.
Yeah,
I think it's clear. It's clear to me. I'm hoping it's clear to the applicant that, you know, 6 stories is just too high.
Okay. And that's also the position, you know, that's where I'm coming on this. It's too high. I don't know what the right height is, but I know 6 is not the right height. And so I think the thing that we always have to balance with a 40B development, as people know, is we can't put conditions on that make it uneconomic for the developer. So, you know, it's sort of hard to know what is going to make it uneconomic for the developer because we haven't been provided a performer. That being said, we can go with you know, best judgment on something like this and working with you at town council. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Levine, good evening. Yes, go ahead.
I understand and I appreciate this matter has been considered by the board for over a year. I'm not going to repeat the arguments that you've heard pro or con, you know, the various waivers, you know, height in particular. But I only would suggest, I understand the board's concern. But you know, we are, you know, driven by the law and the case law. And yeah, I would just direct the board, and I know Amy is aware of it, to the Sunderland case, which went to the Supreme Court, which talked about, in a much smaller town, Sunderland, Massachusetts, I was involved in that case, about general concerns about fire safety. That was a high-rise building in Sunderland, which I believe has a population. It's a small town near Amherst. Much smaller fire department, much less sophisticated public safety, etc. With a multi-story building. And if one looks at that case, the court said, you can't just deny a 40B project because you don't have equipment or you don't have personnel. It has to be in that case, they were talking about fire safety and they didn't have the ladder. They had mutual aid and stuff like that. Well, there's been no testimony in this matter that the fire department can attend to a fire here. This is a fully sprinklered, fire protected building, not only the high-rise buildings, but also most of or many of the other buildings, because under the building code, if you're 3 or units more, you have to have fire suppression. So a majority of the project is fire suppressed. The comparisons to Lynn, etc., I'm not going to get into the details. I don't think they're fair. In terms of the road size, the road sizes are as big or bigger than your town roads. We've discussed at length no parking restrictions, probably more than you have on public streets. So I understand the board's concern, but it's a qualitative concern. And I think when Mr. Hale said there's no evidence in the record of being unsafe, and the member said, well, I didn't say that the fire department said it was unsafe. I think we all agree that it isn't an issue of being unsafe. And this qualitative decision, irrespective of the case law and the obligation of a town, because, Mr. Chairman, if every town could say, well, we think this is unsafe, or this is going to tax our police or fire or school system, then by definition, 40Bs would never be permitted in smaller towns or virtually any town. I don't want to repeat the testimony. You've been very patient for over a year. I just would suggest that the buildings that proposed, meet the health and safety requirements. There has to be a reason not to grant the waiver before we get into the economic issues. So until the board can articulate a reason, and I understand your concerns, Mr. Chairman, I'm not deminimizing it, but until they can articulate a factual concern, it's a problem with the waiver, it's going to create a problem, etc. We've addressed all the fire department's concerns. We've got the emergency access. I don't know if the member is aware, but you mentioned that we submitted a plan that supplies the turnarounds that were missing that the fire department wanted. So right now, the way the plan is proposed, there are no backing up for any fire vehicles to get in and out. They go around turnarounds. There's no dead ends. It's a loop road. The roads are as wide or wider than town roads. So I only ask the board, and I know it's a difficult position. I would never be on a board of appeals, okay? I would never be on a board of selectmen, but I only ask you to follow the law. And I understand you're conflicted, but I would ask you to follow the law. And, that's all I can ask you to do. And I know you spent a lot of time. I'm not minimizing your efforts to follow the law. I appreciate it. But I'm just asking you to look at the law, and it may be, something that makes the project bigger than you want, but doesn't make it inappropriate under the 40B statute and the cases that have been implementing it. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Levine. Okay, anybody else want to comment on this? Okay. So, Ashley, at this point, if people want to raise their hand in the chat, we will take some public comments. One of the things I've already stated, and what I want is information that is relevant to what we're discussing tonight. And what really we're discussing is conditions. I totally understand that people are opposed to this project. They're concerned about traffic. We're not talking about the South Walpole Common and the traffic flow there. We're talking about the actual 40B development site right now. So please keep your comments relevant and to any new information that will be helpful to the zoning board. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just go in the order that I see the hands pop up. Bill Hamilton,
Have I unmuted?
you sure have.
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Hamilton. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a comment on mutual aid. The emergency exit, that can be blocked by collisions. That's on a very bad curve. It's on a downhill curve. If the weather's slippery, collisions have happened here in the recent past, and it blocked that area, and they had to close Summer Street. So if Summer Street were to close, we couldn't get mutual aid in. And mutual aid is not a guarantee. Towns can evaluate giving mutual aid for a particular section and renege on it because it's too dangerous for their fire department to go in and be locked in there. So you can have the main entrances blocked and the emergency exits blocked, and mutual aid can't get in, and sprinkler buildings can empty the water tank. And if you don't have water level in the South Walpole tank, because we're our own district, you won't be able to suppress the fires in other buildings. So you're lowering the fire protection for the town, for the South Walpole district, and you may not be able to put out the fires there. I agree 100% with Jane Coffey said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. And Mr. Hamilton, I did see you submitted 2 comments today about, you've obviously read the draft decision that was posted online, and I saw what you raised some questions about the profits, and that will definitely be taken into consideration in anything that we draft. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ashley, who's next?
Don Freiberger. Don, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, this is Dawn Freiberger. I'm an RTM for Precinct 5. I apologize if I'm repeating some things that have already been said, but I will be brief. My biggest concern has always been with the volume of units that is going to be in this development. I feel that it really is going to impact all the town services pretty dramatically. I'm also very concerned about the traffic, and I know that's not the point of this whole conversation tonight, but it does directly relate to the density of the project. I know that Mr. Hale's group was wanting to pay half of the cost of the reconfiguration when and if that happens to the South Walpole Common. I feel like he should be 100% responsible for that. The stadium traffic is terrible. The Boyden traffic is terrible. I know the Boyden traffic, once their school buses should, and kids are back to normal after COVID, things should be a little bit better there. But adding 300 units is a big deal. So in my mind, one way to decrease the density of this project is to not allow for the waiver and only have 4 stories for each building. If my math is correct, that would be 18 affordable units less than what if the whole 6 stories were allowed. That doesn't seem like a ton of affordable units to sacrifice for all the safety issues, all the burden on the town, traffic, the railroad tracks, all of that. Now, of course, if Mr. Hale wanted to put those 18 units, affordable units, someplace else within the development, then I think that would be a very noble thing for him to consider to do, since this is a 40B project. So just because you take off 2 floors from each of those buildings does not mean you're absolutely required to take away the affordable units. And then the last thing I wanted to say was more of a question about the parking. I know a couple ZBA meetings before, there was a conversation about whether or not the affordable units would be having to pay for the parking spaces that are underneath the buildings. I'm not sure where that stands. And so my question is, 1, where does that stand? And 2, is that going to be the majority of the assigned parking for those buildings? Is it going to be the indoor underneath parking? And if so, are the affordable units going to be charged for those parking spaces? And if they're not, is there adequate if they are, and they choose not to purchase those or rent those spaces, is there going to be adequate parking outside for them to park at? Because I can see that being a pretty big deal. I think those are my main points.
Okay, and your point about the parking for affordable units, that actually was brought up by the zoning board, and you know, Judy Barrett, do you want to comment on, you thought that was the condition that we would be able to put in as far as that, is that correct?
Put myself on mute, now I forget that I'm on it. About the parking?
Well,
is that what your question was, John?
Yeah, Don Freiberger just raised the question about the affordable units and parking, the below grade under the building parking. And we spent a bit of time talking about this, and I'm going to let Mr. Hale answer after you give your perspective on how that actually would work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the board certainly can require the applicant to offer spaces to the affordable units subgrade. Whether you can actually then somehow require that, I'm not really sure. Amy and I have been back and forth about this a little bit. I think you have to be careful that you're actually not requiring the developer to do something for the affordable units that they're not already doing for the market rate units. So if they're charging for the market rate units, they should be able to charge for the affordable units, but then there should be a commensurate reduction in the rent so that the affordable tenant isn't paying more than 30% of their income to live in the development. But how that gets allocated, in terms of number of spaces, subgrade, and so forth, I think that's still up for discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Levine, go ahead.
Thank you. We discussed this with DHCD, and I think as a continuum from what Judy said, that the developer, has to offer the spaces equally to the affordables in the market, but the developer is allowed to charge the affordable for the spaces. DHCD says there has to be a reasonable reduction, and they don't define what reasonable reduction is between the quote market rate and the affordable rate. It wouldn't have anything to do with rent. It's an option that the affordable unit owner would be given. They would have a right to, if they wished equally, to get a underground space, and they would have to pay something for it that DHCD said would be less than, but some reasonable reduction, undefined, in the rate that's being charged to the market rate. So it doesn't have anything to do with 30% of the rent. It's just,
I don't agree.
Most respectfully, an affordable unit owner can buy a brand new car. We have surface spaces. Additionally, it's a choice for the renter. An affordable unit can have a brand new car, or they can have a 10-year-old car. DHCD doesn't get into those.
That's not a condition imposed on the tenant by the project.
No, but the
Judy,
point
please,
is,
hold on. Judy,
Mr. Chairman.
Please let Mr. Levine finish, and then Mr. Hale, I'll get to you. Mr.
Sorry,
Levine,
Mr. Chair.
are you finished?
As I was saying, the units are the parking spaces below ground are available, will be available, the affordable units. They will have to, if they want to use them, rent them, pay something additional to the rent. And that will be based on a reasonable reduction on what the market people are paying for the spaces. That's from DHCD. We've asked them about it. That's where they are. And I don't think, most respectfully, Mr. Chairman, that these issues are Board of Appeals issues. I think they're, subsidizing agencies issues. They're not Board of Appeals issues, to be honest, most respectfully. So I would so that's kind of where we are. If we're talking additionally about uneconomic, if we're going to have that discussion, we need to know that you're not going to grant the waiver. Again, this goes to regional need, not just also, for some local reason. This is the local reason that prevents you to grant the waiver. And then we can have, additional information presented as to, profitability. I would remind the board most respectfully that this is a rental project, as well as a for sale project. The rental project is not limited, doesn't talk about 20% profit. That's only with respect to a for sale project. The rental project is guided by totally different rules. It's based on return on investment to the owner. So if we're going to have the conversation that you're not going to grant the waiver, and again, we've submitted evidence we don't need the height waiver in this zone, but if we're going to have conversation about a waiver's not going to be granted, then we should be afforded, and the reason why there's a local need not to, grant the waiver, then I would ask permission to be able to present evidence relative to the economics of it. And we'll be happy, to do that, and support the economics. But remember, most respectfully, that the allocation of profit for the rental side is a totally different formula than on the for sale side. Totally different formula.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Levine. Judy Barrett, do you want to address that? And would you also comment on the bit about the ROI, the return on investment for the apartments? How is that different than regular 40B? I'm not.
Well, at the risk of sounding flippant, I don't mean to, John, there isn't any such thing as a regular 40B. They're all kind of different, but home ownership is different from rental. That certainly is true. And, I am not a multifamily finance expert, but I can tell you that DHCD several years ago kind of established an approach to establishing whether a project is rendered uneconomic on the rental side. And if you want that reviewed because you're going to impose some condition the developer says will make us uneconomic, then, you can say to the developer, we want you to bring these buildings down to 2 stories, and the developer says, I can't do it. It's on them to submit a pro forma to you that shows what the economic impact of that change would be. And you then have the ability to have a qualified consultant review that. But it is based on return on cost. At least that's my understanding of the current formula that's in use. As for rental developments, as for the question about the whole parking thing, I would just simply say my understanding is that Mass Housing is the project eligibility subsidy program for this project. So I can just tell you that DHCD and Mass Housing Partnership all have different policies. So I would certainly be kind of more interested in knowing what Mass Housing had to say. But then I'll also say this. There's always this rub between the subsidizing agencies and where their authority begins and ends, and what your authority is and where it begins and ends. And there's always this tension around where that lies. With all due respect, I think any ZBA that's not paying attention to equity for the lower moderate income tenants it probably isn't doing its job, because I don't think the developers generally do. So if you guys are concerned about the affordable tenants having, equitable access to quality parking spaces, then address it and let the developer push back. But I wouldn't be a shrinking violet over it just because somebody at DHCD that in a conversation you weren't party to has offered an opinion. You're just as entitled to check something with DHCD as they are.
So Mr. Chairman, that would be my comment. Who did you speak with at DHCD?
My partner spoke to Alana Murphy.
And then, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I had a couple other questions based on the statements that were made by Attorney Levine. You kept referring to granting a waiver. What waiver are you talking about? You're talking about the height waiver?
Excuse me, Amy.
What?
I'm talking about waiver, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Levine. She asked a question. You can answer it directly. Thank you.
Amy, I'm talking about waivers in general, you know, kind of in a subset, you know, is the height waiver, but I'm talking about denial of waivers in general. There has to be some local reason not to do it, and then we get into the economic discussion. So if the board's going to deny a waiver for some local concern, remembering this is about regional housing, then I think following up on what Judy said, you know, then, you know, we would be given the opportunity to say why that may make the project uneconomic, and remembering that we have two parts of the project.
So I can definitely say that I have done decisions, 40B decisions that have had the affordable units. For example, condo fees are less. So, you know, parking, obviously, you know, parking spaces would be less. That definitely, you know, I'm completely in agreement with Judy on that. And then the other thing too is that the whole purpose of 40B is to, you know, provide affordable housing. So you have to provide housing that's affordable, and then everything around that housing has to also be affordable. You can't just say you can rent this unit for less, but you're still going to pay the same amount for everything else. It tacks on and on and on. But going back to the waivers, I think that it's pretty clear, Mr. Levine, or Attorney Levine, I'm sorry, that that the height waiver won't be granted. And so I don't see the applicant receiving 6 stories. And so if that's the case, then I think we might want to deal with this right now.
Right.
And, you know, if that's the case, then, you know, we go to the regs and, you know, we take a look at 6 and, you know, section 6, and we call in, you know, somebody to review the financial statements, and we you know, we get to the actual return on investment. Because
Amy,
that's where we're at, unfortunately.
Okay, Amy, I appreciate that. I appreciate what you said. I agree with what you said. Mm-hmm. So if the board is not going to tell the applicant that, if the board's going to tell the applicant, in their opinion, okay, we'll just assume for the purpose of argument that we need a waiver. We say we don't, and they're not going to tell the applicant to what extent they're going to grant the waiver, whether it be 1 story, 2 stories, etc. We can't do an economic analysis. All right. So if the board, so the idea that Mr. Fitzgerald said, well, we're not going to tell you until we deliberate what the height waiver is going to be. So obviously, if the height waiver is 1 story, that's a different economic analysis than if it's 2 stories, 3 stories, etc. Right? So we can't put information in that addresses what will the waiver do if we're reduced by 1 story, if we don't know it's not going to be more than 1 story. You know, so that's really what I'm asking, and I don't disagree with you. With respect to things like condo fees under this, you know, if you do it under the condominium, which is, you know, based on value, the statute requires the condominium to have lower condo fees. If you do your condominium based on the value of the units, right, by definition.
But if you do it based on size.
If you do it on size, then the condo fees are higher. But on the other hand, the sale price would be less because it's a greater condo fee, so the developer gets less money. I agree with all that. Yeah. I am not saying, just for the record, that in any way, so we don't make a big deal about the sparking thing, the affordable people will have equal opportunity to get underground parking spaces. Okay? They will pay something for it to be determined by the subsidizing agency. Period. End of discussion. They're going to get the same thing, same opportunities everyone else is. If they choose they want an underground parking space, you know, and unless they run out and there'll be a lottery or whatever, then they'll get an equal opportunity. So I can't address the waiver, and you and I have worked, you know, quite a bit on this. I can't address the waiver until somebody says, we're not, you know, whether we're right or wrong, this is what we're going to give you for a waiver. Okay? And so, you know, that's all I'm asking, Amy. Does the opportunity to know what the waiver is going to be, and then we can decide, are we going to put economic stuff in, or are we going to say, if the decision is otherwise okay, we'll not fight that reduction. And I agree with you. I don't want to go through an economic analysis that the developer can just say, okay, everything else we don't have to fight about that waiver. Okay? But I don't have the whole decision. All right? So we need to know that. Okay? That's it. Everything you said is correct, Amy.
Thank you.
You can write that down.
I did already.
Okay. Hold on, one person at a time. Let me just, Town Council, do you have anything else to add?
I do not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hale, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the views of both my lawyer and Town Council. I'm not a lawyer, and I just want to make a couple points. Over the years, my company and I have been responsible for building and then operating quite a few projects that have affordable units, and we've always taken care of our affordable tenants and treated them with respect. And any insinuation otherwise is unfair and unwarranted. Every single unit here will have the opportunity for free parking. Every single unit will have the opportunity for free parking. In our other projects, people have rented underground spaces, and we haven't asked them when they rented them whether they were affordable or market. We often build storage units. People rent them or they don't. We try and we try and build quality housing, and more housing, more quality housing, more affordable housing is better than less, just in the general sense. And we're trying to create affordable housing. We've been asked to make an awful lot of adjustments to our plan, which we've made. We've been asked to make a significant contribution beyond our impact to the intersection, and we've offered to do that. I don't believe that we actually need a height waiver, and so the question isn't about the waiver. I don't think we need one. The building inspector has ruled. Maybe there's some argument, some legal argument that we have to maintain, or there's still a side lot waiver, but there's not, and that applies, but the height regulation for the zone doesn't apply. I don't know. I don't even want to get into any of that. I just want to understand if I have a project that, as we've proposed it, is going to get approved or not, or if it's going to be restricted to 5 stories or 4 stories, and then I'm going to make a decision, a business decision, as to whether I'm going to appeal. And if I appeal, I'm probably going to win. And I think we all know that. I don't want to appeal. I want to build housing. I want to add to the community. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hale. Okay, and that all started with a question from Don Friedberger. So thank you, Don, for your question there. Okay, Ashley, are there other residents from South Walpole or the community that want to address the board?
Yes, and I just want to, I put Dawn back into attendees, so if she had a follow-up, Dawn, just raise your hand and I'll bring you back in. I didn't mean to cut you off. So I'll go to the next hand, which is Erica Burden. Erica, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, hi Ashley, thank you. So I am going to actually just try to keep brief. I'm going to speak to the pro forma. I do want to add that, just a reminder that, residents here feel that this development is going to worsen the traffic intersection. So to find out that he's coming in to fix it, he's making it worse. So I don't know if we're supposed to be grateful that he's coming in to fix it, because they're going to be making it worse. So I won't speak to that anymore. I just wanted to point that out. So regarding the pro forma, I feel that they don't want to go to the pro forma route because it won't justify that the project is, that they won't have the results that they're looking for. I don't believe that this project is uneconomic at 4 stories. I don't know why we're not pushing for that. I think that to just take their word for it and say if they build 4 stories, it's going to be uneconomic. We can't just be guessing here and relying on, we should actually be seeing the numbers. I am an accountant. I'm a CPA. I have over 20 years of accounting experience, and I would love to see the pro forma. I thought we could have requested that months ago. If they're making an argument that the project is going to be uneconomic, then we need to see that. This shouldn't be a guessing game. And I don't think there's any resident of South Walpole, being an accountant or not, nobody believes that this project is going to be uneconomic at 4 stories. Cutting down the units by 60 at the rates that they're going for would still make a decent profit. And again, until I see the numbers, that's what I believe. And I just want to reiterate that this land was not purchased at a high rate. It was purchased pretty cheap. So again, I just don't believe, without seeing the pro forma, seeing the actual numbers, that cutting this complex down in size is going to make the project uneconomic. And that's all I really wanted to say. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erica. And by the way, we did receive a letter from you. And one of the things that you said in it, in your last paragraph, it said, it's time to push to have this development downsized any which way is legally possible. And, we definitely hear your point on that. And I think that we want to make sure that whatever's done is legally correct and, as you've even said, doesn't make the project uneconomic for the developer. So thank you for your earlier letter.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay. Joanne Mulligan, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, everyone. This is Joanne Mulligan, RTM Precinct 5. I think you know where I stand. I totally am for downsizing the project for density, all the millions of reasons. And I just wanted to, I've written letters about the character of South Walpole. I don't think this fits into South Walpole at all, but today I did get the numbers, the approximate numbers of the number of people that live in South Walpole, like proper, and what I call like 02071 zip code. Walpole has 3 zip codes. There are about 950 people that live in South Walpole. How many people are going to be added by this project? It's got to be getting close. And this is, I think, one of the main reasons why everyone is against so many things about the project. The road in being like a dead end, safety reasons. Does the fire department have enough personnel? If something happens, everyone is absolutely petrified that there's going to be some kind of catastrophic event. So I just wanted to let you know that, we've talked a lot about the character and the people in South Walpole not wanting it, but when you look at those numbers, it's like, wow, that sure says to me that this project needs to be less dense, no buildings, definitely over 4 stories. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit in at all down here. This is not downtown Walpole. This is not another city. It's South Walpole. And if we have 950 people living down here and we're going to put a 300-unit complex in, that makes no sense to me. Thank you. I know you guys will be deliberating on this. I appreciate all the work that you've done.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. And if you recall earlier in this whole process, the zoning board on their own found out the number of residents in South Walpole based on the zip code, the number of residential addresses, 312. So we are very aware that this is really doubling the size of the South Walpole community. We're the ones that made the point about 312 in the zip code. So we understand that, and thank you for adding the number of 950 to give it another perspective. Okay, Ashley, who's next?
Becky Litvak, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good evening, everybody. First, I just want to make a really small request in one of the conditions. I read on there that you did put on, so thank you for this, no construction workers, no construction vehicles can be on any of the side roads. So I do appreciate that. I just wanted to take it one step further. I just picture construction workers dropping their personal vehicles off on all of our side roads and then walking over to the site. So I don't know if that's even a possibility, but I just want to, you know, put that little small thing in, because obviously this is happening. So we just want to make sure that all of our side roads are protected from just being congested with extra cars being parked in front of our houses. And then, I mean, you obviously know where I stand. I appreciate you taking all the time to listen and to read all my letters over the past year and a half. I think I would just like to end and reiterate, you know, with a half a mile long dead end road encircled by a railroad and swamp, even 5-story buildings back there, it's just a tragedy waiting to happen. So I'm really am looking to you on behalf of all of us, hoping that you will consider the 4 stories, decreasing this density, increasing our safety, because at the end of the day, that is number 1 priority for our current residents and the residents who will soon be our close neighbors. So thank you again for your time. I really appreciate everything that you've done, and best of luck.
Okay, thank you, Becky. Ashley, next.
Yeah, Shirley, if I could just add, parking for workers, all of that is something that will need to be addressed in the construction management plan. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Hale, go ahead.
So this is discouraging. So I just want to kind of replay how we got here. So you hired a peer reviewer that wanted us to reorganize the back of the site. You know, I originally had 4 48-unit, 4-story buildings. The peak of those roofs are actually not much different than you know, a 6-story building with a flat roof. From a fire perspective, they're both they're both fire protected buildings. But my point is, I've spent a giant amount of money and time, and spent your time in good faith responding to your requests that I reorganize the site. I heard from my consultants, my lawyers, that plan with 4 48-unit buildings absolutely would have been approved, if not here, at the Housing Appeals Committee. So are you saying that you'd rather have the 4 48-unit buildings? I'm truly at a loss. You know, many families in Massachusetts pay over half their income for housing, and it's because there's not enough supply. You know, I'm not trying to be unreasonable, but you know, I just don't understand. If the 6 stories was an issue, and it was a safety issue, it would have been nice to know that a long time ago. And you know, it's coming up now after, in good faith, we've reorganized and spent a lot of time and resources. And you know, I'm not saying that there isn't a compromise, but I am saying, I'll just say it. If the answer is 4 stories, I'll appeal it. I'm sorry. I just will. And I think we should just put ourselves out of our misery. I want to get a vaccine and go see my grandkids on the other side of the country. I think we've been at this 376 days. I think that's where I am.
No, I
want to be clear.
I hear you. I understand what you're saying. I know a lot of work's been done on all sides on this. So, and you know, 376 days we've been working on this. I feel it. I also recognize that the people of South Walpole will be living this living with this for eternity. And
so just the South Walpole thing, you know, when we were working with the school department, one of the things that they said is that state law says any you got to charge for anyone within 2 miles. We did the analysis. There's 600 households within 2 miles. So I live in Concord. There's a part of Concord called West Concord, but it's not really a real thing. It's an idea in people's heads. I understand that, but that can't prevent good quality housing. Otherwise, we're all sunk. I mean, I'm you know, people don't like change. I understand that. You know, people, I'm done.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, quickly. So I think that the whole reference to South Walpole, Mr. Hale, is to, if I may address Mr. Hale, is that I think the board is looking for you to be a good neighbor. So you're coming in with a 40B development, and you are constantly telling us that no matter what you want to do, you will get it at HAC. I particularly do not necessarily believe that. I know that our chances are very, very tough at HAC, but I don't think that the board needs to look at this project from the standpoint of no matter what we do, he can appeal, get what he wants, etc. There is a neighborhood here. The neighborhood exists, whether you like it or not. It exists, and I think that you have to come in as a developer and you have to be a good neighbor. I think that this board has been nothing but reasonable. This board has said, hey, listen, we don't like 6 stories. That's not an outrageous statement to say we don't want 6 stories. The board, as Mr. Fitzgerald clearly said, hasn't made up their mind. They're not going to say, okay, we only want 1-story buildings. They have not made up their mind. They are going to take all of this evidence. They are going to look at it. They're going to deliberate. They're going to make the right decision. You know, on the one hand, you're constantly telling us that you don't want to go to HAC. You've never appealed anything. On the other hand, you're telling us, I'm going to go to HAC and get exactly what I want. I think the board is in the middle. The board just wants you to be a good neighbor. I'm very encouraged to hear that you are going to offer parking spaces at a reduced rate. It would be great to hear that you are amenable to some kind of height reduction, which I'm not going to lie is going to result in a unit reduction, which I think might make everyone happy. So I think rather than, coming at this from, South Walpole versus Mr. Hale, perhaps we can come at it from, hey, I'm a developer and I'm going to come in, I'm going to be a good neighbor. And I'm sure that's eventually going to happen. You've done developments before. This isn't your first time. So, maybe in this process, we can just, look at it from that standpoint rather than contentious.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Hale. Please respond if you'd like.
I take your point, and you have good points. I am trying to be a good neighbor, and I'm trying to compromise. And one of the, this I think bothers people, but when I chose the site, one of the reasons that I chose the site was because it could be a community in a way unto itself and have really limited impact other than traffic. And, maybe some teachers will live there, maybe the next star of the soccer team will live there. I don't know. It'll add to the community. But when I look for sites, I look for sites like this that don't have a big impact. So, what we're really talking about is just limiting the number of people. And I think, I made a statement about I want to be a good neighbor, and I don't want to threaten with the HAC thing. People don't realize, they say Mr. Hale. Mr. Hale has a bunch of investors that care less about affordable housing than I do. and they want me to make business decisions. And so I'm just trying to give you parameters. And I want to be a contributor to the community. But I don't have the ability to make just any decision. And that's all I want to say.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hale. Suzanne Murphy, go ahead.
You're on mute, Suzanne.
At the last hearing, Mr. Hill, you indicated you were going to speak to your investors then. That's what you said right to us.
Okay.
I
Mr.
think
Hale,
I think.
Want to address that?
Yes. I just indicated where I would come out, and I think, you know, it's very simple. I will never completely give up my appeal rights. It just doesn't make sense, because if I have to appeal, you know, my investors are going to say, well, appeal. You know, they understand. They're real estate investors. They have their own, you know, counsel that's as smart as mine, and they know what the law is. And so I have to come up with a compromise. And if for some reason it doesn't work, and I have to spend all the time, all I'm saying is that they're like a board of directors. They're going to want me to go for everything. I don't want to do that. I want to come up with something the community that where I've given and the community's given, and we come to a compromise that works for everyone.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Levine.
Yeah, just to get us back, to, the law and the regulations. I know Amy's familiar with it, but the regulations talk about, when you determine uneconomic review of financial statement, and a board may request review pro forma following preconditions have been met. Other consultant review has been completed. I think we're past that. The applicant has an opportunity to modify his original proposal to address the issue raised. And I would just, again, put in the back of your mind what Mr. Hale said a few moments ago about the original 4-story buildings that went to, 2 6-story buildings, etc. And that was kind of on the road to resolve that, at least we thought. The board has an opportunity to propose conditions to mitigate the project's impact and to consider requested waivers. That's where we are right now. The applicant has indicated that it does not agree to the proposed condition or waivers or denials because they would render the project uneconomic. A board may not conduct review. I'm reading from the regulations. Because may not cover review of a pro forma in order to see whether the project would still be economic if the number of dwelling units were reduced, unless such reduction is justified by a valid health, safety, environmental, design, open space planning, or other local concerns that directly resides in the size of the project on a particular site consistent with 760. Now, Amy is a very good lawyer. I'm probably not as good. I don't want to get into a legal argument right now. The regulations indicate that people should cooperate with each other. They should stay out of the HAC. They should try and work it out. I understand at the end of the day, as chairman and the board members have to make a decision. So there was a suggestion of losing a story. And that would be a decision that Mr. Hale would make together with the finality of the rest of the bundle of the conditions. One condition that's out there that has not even been put to paper is the contribution or the methodology of the contribution to the traffic intersection. So the decision is a bundle of requirements. If all those bundle of requirements are met, would this developer go and agree to reduction, to 1 story? I think this developer has indicated if all the other things are in order and we get through the Conservation Commission, I think this developer is willing to talk about compromising. But we can't have this compromise, and we can't then go to the uneconomics until you make a decision, which you can, that there's some health and safety and the, you know, things in you know, that relate to the regs, and then we go to that. But it, you know, it's not a derivative of purely economic or uneconomic. It can still be economic, but we can only go to that if in fact there's a valid health, safety, design, open space plan, or other local concern that direct the project. Now, again, I've heard the conversation about South Walpole, and this is a large project, and we can debate that till 4 a.m. I don't know whether or not that comports with what the regulations are talking about. I'm sure if, unfortunately, we wanted at HAC, the town, you know, will argue that position. I don't know what the HAC will do. All right. You know, I've never had a slam dunk case in my life. I want to work this out. Okay. I do believe, you know, we can work it out, but we need to know what the board wants to do. And I don't think it's in anyone's interest, with all due respect to the board members, to caucus and come back and say, we're only going to approve X stories. And if you're going to do that, you got to tell us that now. And then we have to make a decision. You know, you have to make a decision if that comports to the regulations to allow you to do that. And then we have to make a decision if we're going to go and show you why it's uneconomic. I think that's really the trilogy. I don't necessarily know that we have to go through that. I think everything Mr. Hale said, you know, we've done these changes to mitigate concerns. So it's kind of, you know, being a mouse on a wheel and in a cage, you know, keep going around and around. So it is what it is. Okay. And I just would like some direction from the board, the chair, right now as to what you want us to do. I would hate to wind up in the HAC on something we can resolve. And I think we were pretty close to resolving it, and have got sidetracked now about just generalities. We're not sure how many stories we want it to be. We'll let you know. Well, at that point, it's going to be too late to let us know, because, you know, we can't necessarily reply to a 4-story proposal, a 3-story proposal, or whatever. Remembering, as David said, we did have a 4-story proposal, and for other reasons, you know, the board didn't like that, which is, you know, something I think that somebody, whether it's the HAC or the guy at the convenience store, would consider to be, you know, kind of illogical. So at this point, I think you guys got to make a decision of how you want to proceed. I appreciate, you know, your dilemma, but, you know, that's just where we are right now. And I don't think Amy and I are separated by much difference of opinion as to where we are. And I should, you know, support the board. You know, that's their job. I'm not fighting the board. I'm just asking, what do you want us to do next?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Levine. Ashley, did you want to say, because I see we have Mark Major from South Walpole, and but go ahead, Ashley.
We do have a few hands raised. I just wanted to note for the record that the board did not direct the applicant to do a 6-story building through the design peer reviewer. He had concerns about the way that the parking configuration was. He had concerns about the lack of usable open space for residents. There were concerns about impact to the wetlands. And so there were these other concerns that were brought up, and this is what the applicant chose to do to try to address those. So I just wanted to be clear that the board did not say go put a 6-story building up.
Ashley, I agree.
Yep, I just wanted to be clear for everyone watching at home and remind the board. So shall I move on to the next public comment? Okay.
Yes, please do.
Mark Major, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, thanks for taking my comments. I just want to say, you know, as a resident that definitely will be very negatively impacted by this, which is very clear. I live right on Summer Street. It's going to, no question, increase the volume and the speed of cars flying by my house every single day. I think I'm working through my stages of grief and knowing that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen in some form that is much bigger than I'm comfortable with. But I do think it's disingenuous to say that, you know, at any point near this that this project could be deemed uneconomic. I think you could do a 100 unit project and still make money in this location. So I don't think this ever was about 40B. I think 40B was the vehicle to get it to the location that it's at right now, and that Mr. Hale in his history has used the statute to be able to be very successful in developing projects all over Massachusetts where he normally would not be able to build those projects. So I think if it's me, at conclusion here, what would I be asking for in order to kind of approve and not create more roadblocks and hurdles to this project? I think there needs to be a height limit of no more than 4 stories. I think there needs to be a density limit of, somewhere in the low 200s of units. I think you need to put a second roadway that doesn't intersect with Summer Street, where you can access the units of this project, either from 1A or from another road. And I think you need to pay for the entire redevelopment of an intersection at Washington Street and the Ponset in summer in a way that the neighborhood is happy with and that doesn't create gridlock during rush hour every single day. That would be my minimum and starting point. And I appreciate everybody's time and hearing me out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Major.
Okay. And next we have Sharon McCarthy. Sharon, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much for letting me speak tonight, and I thank you so much for the work that you've been doing. I'm a resident of South Walpole, one of the 02071 people, and I've been listening to the meetings, and I have the same concerns that have been stated tonight, but I just did want to go over, regarding health and safety. Being a registered nurse working in the town, that's definitely a concern of mine, and I definitely do think that we have some concerns regarding health and safety with 5-6 story buildings and the amount of people that will be coming into this development. I think it should be reduced for the size. I think it was said to a letter to the ZBA by the fire department in regard to staffing. It's going to create an extreme challenge for the fire department regarding staffing. That's a townwide concern, and that should be a high priority issue. That's a health and safety issue right there. We've all seen Tetra Tech's report stating that the project will have significant impact on off-site automobile and pedestrian traffic. That's a health and safety concern for the town, for the people who are going to be moving in there. That's going to impact the people around the Walpole Common, Summer Street, Winter Street. That whole area is going to be impacted, and I am concerned for people's safety. So I think that is worth addressing. Taking down the density, cutting down the height of the building would be great for reducing the amount of people, and also because of the character of the town being so interrupted by this development, I don't think is an appropriate site for the development at all. I think it was, as Mr. Major said, proposed and brought to light because it is, under the pretense of being affordable housing, but I think you can cut down the amount of units without making an impact on affordable housing. I think we could still make this an affordable housing project that will be beneficial to people without having so many people in that development. The winding roads, the small town common, I think those are all appropriate reasons to address the idea of not adding such a giant development in this area. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Sharon McCarthy. Ashley, do we have anybody else?
Yes, we sure do. So I'm gonna, some secondhand raises have come up, but I'm gonna go through the folks who haven't spoken yet. So up next is Phil Michaels. Phil, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ashley. You can hear me?
Yep.
Very good. Thank you. Phil Michaels. I'm the pastor of South Walpole United Methodist Church. I speak for myself and not for the church as a resident of South Walpole. So we have heard a lot, and rightly so, about safety and laws and regulations. But a couple people have mentioned this already, one right before me, and I believe Joanne as well. What this is about character, and the character of South Walpole. And yes, South Walpole is a real thing. South Walpole is a real group of people who live in this community and who will be impacted by this development. Now, I'm not opposed to this development. I'm all for affordable housing, although as someone who grew up in the Midwest, it's kind of funny what affordable housing qualifies for out here. But nonetheless, I'm for that. And I am for, as a pastor, welcoming in new people into our community. What I am not for is the destruction of the character of a community. And I think that's what's most important here. And that's what I just wanted to remind us of, is the character of this community. And that, yes, 02071 is a real thing in a real place with real people who live together in this community. And we want to welcome in new residents and new neighbors and have them be a part of this community. And so if we destroy the character of the community in an effort to bring more people in, then they're not going to be able to experience what we have experienced by living here. So I wanted to say that. And the other thing that I wanted to say was that to me, and I know Chairman Lee, you mentioned this and a couple people have skirted around it a little bit, but when I saw the proposal to rip up the historic South Walpole Common, which is directly in front of our church, to me that speaks to character. That's the heart of this community, that location. You know you're in South Walpole when you're there. It's a historic place, and that site should not be ripped up for the sake of this development. So to the extent that this development would rip up the heart of South Walpole, then it shouldn't be done. However, if it can be done in such a way that does not rip up the community and the character of the community, then it should be done. And so I think there is serious consideration needs to be done as to reducing the size of the development such that that intersection does not have to be, certainly there can be some safety measures improved there, but that intersection common does not have to be ripped up and destroyed. Because I think that that is a metaphor for what overbuilding in this community will do. And so we need to limit the size of this development appropriately. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for your comments. And yeah, we understand your perspective. Thank you.
Okay, John Casellas. John, you should be able to speak now.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to say, the beginning presentations of the project, Mr. Hale presented the project as hidden. He used that adjective a lot, the word hidden. So, I mean, I would like him to keep his promise and honor his word. Keep the project hidden. Keep your down to 3 stories, 4 stories, whatever you decide. And I don't see any reason why they can't achieve the same economic goals with the height of the buildings as such. And I'm also opposed to any major changes to our town common. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, the next person is Andrea Black.
Hi, this is Andrea Black, and I live on Summer Street in South Walpole 02071. And I would like to reiterate that, yeah, we do exist. We're here. But one thing I wanted to say was I attended the last meeting and for several hours listened to all of the different waivers that are being requested. And quite frankly, I think it's in black and white right in those waivers where every single waiver is a request to minimize the amount of space that is typically required. And so all of those waivers are essentially asking that we squash this development that is way too big for our community into this existing land. So the proof, as far as I'm concerned, is in those requested waivers. Clearly, it's too big. And I actually didn't know that the developer would only be paying half for any destruction that was done to our town common. I don't think any changes should be made down there. And I certainly don't think that the town of Walpole should have to pay a single penny to aid and abet this monstrosity that is happening down the street. And quite frankly, if I wanted to walk out my front door and see 7-story tall buildings, I would have bought a house in Boston. So that's it. That's what I had to say.
Nice.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Ashley, who's next?
So, Charlie, that is all the.
Good job.
Good job.
It's going to disable talking there. Oh, sorry, some more hands just popped up. So, let's see. Walter Decker. Walter, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Good. Hi. Mr. Chairman, been listening to this. I'm kind of new to this, but I've been a resident of Walpole for 6 years. I was in Needham for about 25 years. And when I was in Needham, the last, just before I left, there was also a very aggressive developer who wanted to put up a massive project. And the town bought it and got it drastically reduced. So it was not going to destroy the character of Needham. It was just way overdone for what we were trying to do. Now I'm in Walpole now, and for 6 years, and I live at Swan Pond, so I'm at 02081. I'm not in South Pole, but just want to make this point. We have 172 units spread out in greater territory, but we have 2 entrances and exits. And there's many times when we've had the fire department or the health and safety people had to come in because of an injury or somebody's ill or whatever. And that's important to this. This gets to what I think it's Ms. Coffey was saying, and others. The density of this is just amazing, just from common sense viewpoint. I've got a picture of it here in front of me. You can't see it, but I'm looking at it. I'm thinking, my God, the entrance road up to a certain point looks like it's got a lane on it. And after that, as I look at the other pictures, they don't look like wide roads. Someone made the point that these roads were wider than the town roads. I don't think so. I mean, I know it's a rendering, and maybe it's a little different. But I just look at this, and one way in, one way out. This is just flat out dangerous. Just common sense tells me that. And I know they've got, the developer has figures about the square footage and all that. The Tetra Tech, I did have a chance to look at that. They were very clear about the traffic ramifications of this. And it just puzzled me. I think the developer at one point said he had video cameras showing the traffic. I'd love to see where those are, but Tetra Tech couldn't have been more clear about how the very bad impact of traffic from this site. And then finally, this caught me, a community unto itself. Well, I'm not sure what he means by that, but I don't see any stores there where they go get food, pharmacies, all the things that people need to live into a community unto itself. There are going to be a lot of cars coming out of this one small area there. And I get that there's a lack of supply of housing in Massachusetts, but my God, you don't have to put it right here. There's plenty of places that this could have been put for this. And I don't think that's a viable argument given the size of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Decker.
Okay, Krista Castellas.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chairman and the board. We appreciate you hearing our testimony yet again this evening. I know I've spoken many times before, but honestly, I can't reiterate the fact that this project is just so immense. It is such a large project. I have lived in Walpole over 18 years now, and I actually live in the 02081 zip code, although I am a South Walpole resident. I live on Lasivita Drive, just off of Winter Street. Not really sure why my street is any different, but I am a South Walpole citizen. And I'm proud of it. I'm proud every day that I go through that intersection. I'm proud that my children go to the Boyden School. I'm proud that my children plant flowers every fall and every spring as part of their 3rd grade projects at the Boyden School. One of the biggest and main concerns that I have when looking at all of this is obviously, yes, Mr. Hale has come in on several occasions. In the first meeting, which was at Boyden more than 2 years ago at this point, was when Mr. Hale, showed us the first rendering of this project, the first designs. The buildings were of a smaller scale. I'm not really sure exactly how this has all transpired. I've been at every meeting. I've been present at all of these. I've listened to everything, but I cannot simply understand how we have gone from 3 stories to 4 stories to 5 stories to 6 stories. And now we're trying to downscale them yet again. This is an immense project. It does not need to be this size. As we can clearly see, if you're driving through that area, you're going to see, you're going to see a skyline that is much larger than any of the houses in that area. There is absolutely, 3-story, there's no 3-story homes there. There's simply 2-story colonial homes. Now we're going to have buildings that are absolutely a monstrosity to the area. It simply does not fit. Unfortunately, it's just not the right place. And, throughout this entire process too, I don't understand why we're considered South Walpole. We are a town. This is Walpole, Massachusetts. It's just because there's one part of South Walpole that this project is going in. I'm still a resident of the town of Walpole. I am not just a resident of South Walpole. This affects every single one of us. It will start with South Walpole. It will start with this project. It will start with the traffic and the safety issues. However, it's then going to go into schools. And eventually, we're going to be overpopulated. If all these projects keep on going in, this is what's going to happen. If we don't start to do this process now by downscaling this project, I don't even know what can happen. I don't know all the other areas of Walpole that are now, possibly being looked into for more affordable housing areas to be protected. I am all about affordable housing for everyone. This is not the problem. The problem is the density, the size, and the positioning of this project. One thing I simply also would like to, ask the board, just give me 1 second. In the whole, when we look at all the sections, but there's section E12 too, the timing of the construction during this process absolutely needs to be addressed. 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Saturday. I was just on a ZBA call last week, I believe it was Burns Ave, and the construction wouldn't even begin there until 8 a.m. It doesn't make sense to me why, if the safety concerns of the residents of Walpole are during that intersection, the traffic and going to the Boyden School or any schools of that matter within that area, that intersection, it just needs to be addressed that maybe the traffic and the trucks aren't going through that area. We also need to direct the trucks directly out to Route 1 so that there is an option of, of having those trucks not go through that intersection. Even if it is changed, it simply doesn't matter. It's just not the right timing to be able to do this. We need to push the hours of that to abbreviate them, to shorten them. And then one other thing too, and I've noticed that at the very beginning of these meetings, there was another member of the ZBA by the name of David Anderson. He was in attendance. However, he has since recused himself. Could someone on the board please explain this to the residents of South Walpole?
Sure. This is John Lee, the chairman. Mr. Anderson is not at these hearings because it's not necessary for him to be here. And one of the reasons is this is a 5-member board. He's an alternate on the board. And Mr. Anderson was not part of the beginning of this hearing because he was not on the zoning board back when these hearings started. So that is why he's not even in attendance at this point.
Okay, so this simply does not have to do with the other property that was acquired by Mr. Hale as a second access point to the project.
So Mr. Anderson made a disclosure that he had a family member involved with that, but it was not him. And, he's not even sitting on the board. He was never sitting on the case for this.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So as an alternate, he can only be a voting member if one of the 5 regular members has missed more than 2 meetings. However, because he was not a member when this all began, he is not even eligible to do that. So
I'm concerned though.
There's no chance.
Oh, okay, there's no chance of what?
Of him
I'm sorry.
There's no chance that he could even fill in at this point, because unfortunately, you know, he wasn't a sworn in member when this started. So,
but he was still on the first few meetings, correct?
He wasn't appointed until like a couple months, I think, at least till after. So he was, yeah, not involved.
So this began on, I want to say March 5th of, maybe March 4th. I'm sure Mr. Hale knows. It was either March 4th or 5th of 2020. We then went into the state of emergency on March 10th of 2020. We're in the middle of a severe pandemic state of emergency. So this was put on hold for, I think, up until about July. Again, Mr. Hale would know.
It was really put on hold until almost the end of September.
Okay,
so beginning of October.
So it was put on hold, and that is, in my experience, that was 2020. Many of my boards were put on hold until after summer, but the alternate, it's not even a chance, because he was not sworn in on March 5th or 4th when this began, when the hearing opened.
Okay, but that's not when Mr. Anderson was on the meeting. However, he was on the meetings in July, I believe.
But there's no chance that he could ever step in and vote for a member that's absent. So that's the purpose of an alternate. An alternate zoning board member will step in when a regular member has missed more than one meeting. So if there's a member that's missed more than one meeting, the alternate steps in. Unfortunately for the Walpole ZBA, he's not even eligible to step in, because he was not a member when this began.
Okay, so he's just allowed on the meetings, but not allowed to be an active member.
It's a public hearing.
It's a public hearing. He's allowed on the meeting. He still is an associate member of this board. He is just not attending any of these meetings now, because he disclosed there was a possible conflict because of a family member with some property in South Walpole that was involved with this. So he's not on it, he can't be on it, and he won't be on it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you to the board, too.
Ms. Casellas, one of the things you talked about, the heights of the buildings. The zoning board has only had 2 heights of buildings on this. It started out with 4 stories, and then when there were concerns about open space and things like that, and the layout, the developer put it up to 6 stories. And as Ashley Clark pointed out, that wasn't something the zoning board suggested. That's what the applicant chose to do, and they went up to 6 stories. So it's either been 4 stories or 6 stories. That's the only thing that's been presented to the zoning board.
Okay, I just do recall back at the Boyden meeting that those buildings were actually, the drawings of the buildings were actually rendered at 3 stories. However, it could have changed therefore after, when the actual plans were submitted to the ZBA, because that could have been prior to that. However, still regardless, whatever, if you look at the area, if 3 stories were to be built, obviously that would fit the area most appropriately. 4 stories, if it needs to be, that is another thing, but I ask the board kindly to please help stop that, because it's just if we go any higher than 3 stories, it's not going to fit the area. I'm sorry to say, I have to just say it for the record. I am opposed to 4 stories or anything larger than that. It just simply doesn't fit. There's not going to be much of a profit in difference made. Mr. Hale purchased this property at a very cheap cost. Very, very cheap. Actually, such dirt cheap that it's almost sad that the town of Walpole couldn't help with some of that and do something more creative with that land. Unfortunately, and we all know, it does abut property that was once contaminated. When we start digging up the soil now and we start digging underneath, it's simply a set of train tracks separating the 2 properties. I have to address that. I'm sorry, I have to say it, because there is part of me that is very concerned about that. I respect everyone, and I'm sorry, I will let it go at this point. Thank you very much.
We've had extensive hearings, and the issue of environmental health has been brought up and discussed. And I think that, at least I'll say for myself, I'm comfortable with where we're at as far as the environmental health of the site.
Mr. Chairman?
Suzanne Murphy, you just raised your hand. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say we had a hearing in July on this project.
Okay, the next person I have is Julie Lowry. That's the last of the new hands. Right?
Hold on, Ashley. Yep. I just want to go ahead, Mr. Hale.
I just want to make a couple points and clarifications. You were correct, Mr. Chairman, that the original application for the project to mass housing was based on 300 units in 4 or 5 4-story buildings. And we acquired an additional 25 acres so we could make the project less dense and a better project. Secondly, there's been a lot of comments about the visual impact of these buildings. The closest one is about 1,700 feet from the road, and it's obscured by, several wetlands that have 40-foot tall trees. You're really not going to see the tall buildings. So it's, I get it's just about the number of people. You can't see these tall buildings. They have no impact on the community. So when you're thinking about this, it's really about people and opportunity for how people live. In terms of the economics, particularly since COVID has come around, the cost of building apartment buildings has gone up. It's different. I don't even know what it is compared to what it was when it started. I don't see how that's an issue. It should either be about health, safety, or environment. I'm willing to, and have been trying to indicate that I want to be a good neighbor. And so that's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hill. Ashley, who do we have next?
So we have Julie Lowry.
Hi there, thank you. Julie Lowry, live in Walpole, not South Walpole. I'm RTM for Precinct 5. Just a couple points I want to make because a lot has already been discussed and several people have touched upon points that I would have made. I want to be very clear that this project absolutely has an effect, will have an effect on the health, safety, and welfare of every single person that moves into that development, along with the residents that live near this project, or even in the town itself. But most importantly, residents that live near South Walpole. I've touched upon this over and over again, and it hasn't been addressed and it hasn't been fixed, but the train tracks that are right outside the exit of this development is going to be an issue. It's not maybe it will be an issue. It's not if, it is when a car gets backed up on those tracks and someone gets killed. That has not been addressed. It's not going to get addressed unless and until this project is shrunk down by at least half in size. And to put it in context, if you go up to Route 1 and look at the preserve and you see that development there, it's 3 stories. And that in and of itself looks massive on Route 1 in Walpole. And we're talking about a 6-story building in South Walpole next to 2-story houses. Mr. Hill continues to say over and over he wants to be a good neighbor. You can talk all you want, but actions speak louder than words. And not once have you come to the table in the 360 odd some odd days that we've been going at this, have you come back and said, you know what, I am going to be a good neighbor. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to shrink this down because I know this is what my neighbors want. You haven't done it. You talk around it, you suggest it, you say you're going to do it, but you haven't. Here we are.
Everything to the board.
Sorry. So Mr. Hale has indicated over and over to your board, directly to your faces, over and over again, that this is what he's willing to do, but he hasn't done it yet. It's disingenuous. So the size needs to be shrunk. The other issue I do want to piggyback, to be quite honest, with the comments regarding one of your other associate members. I do want to make clear that he was involved in a meeting. I don't know if you guys were trying to decipher between him attending as a citizen, but he was actually on the Zoom meeting back in July, and there were a couple of other meetings where he was there. And I'm looking, and I'm going to formally request here tonight that you make public and put it on your site a copy of Mr. Anderson's disclosure form, because I have concerns about that. I have concerns about the fact that I believe it's his brother who owns the land that's being sold or was sold, or there's an easement in order to give them that second passageway. So for all I know, Mr. Anderson could have used his position on this board to gain inside information, outside information. I don't know, but when it looks funny, you have to kind of investigate and take a better look at that.
Mr. Chairman, those accusations, we can't have those. We can't have those. As I explained, Mr. Anderson has absolutely no influence over this board right now. There's not one chance that he can deliberate, that he can vote, that he can do anything. And it's facts. He was not on the board back in March. So if he attended a meeting, it's a public hearing, and I think we need to.
Amy Questle, Town Council. I actually have no problem. We can put Mr. Anderson
definitely.
with all the dates, and I am all for transparency. And that's absolutely fine. We'll put it out there. When he found out there was an issue, he actually came to me, and I said, okay, we got to get a decision from Town Council, and he then stepped back from this. So
right. Oh, and that's fine. I'm not making accusations. Right. I'm just saying, in order to make it transparent.
And we'll post whatever information that we have as far as his disclosure. So.
Thank you.
Okay, Ashley, who's next?
Okay, so we have 3 hands raised from people who have already spoken.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Levine.
I don't mean to cut off anybody, but what I'm asking through the chair is going back to where we started is, the regs talk about giving the applicant the opportunity with the board, where waivers are requested and the board is not inclined to grant the waiver or grant it in whole, to try and work out the compromise. Failing of which, if the board feels, and Amy can advise you much better than I can, there's health, safety, and other issues, then then you can then say we want an economic analysis. We do the economic analysis and we prove it's uneconomic under the guidelines that subsidizing agency would use both for rental and for sale, then the board is between the rock and the hard place. Meaning, if it's uneconomic, and then the board has to grant the waivers. We can go down that road, or we can try and work the waivers out without going down that road. I guess if we go down that road, most respectfully, and we do prove it's uneconomic, then the board has to grant the waivers. Right now, we're willing to try and compromise the waivers, or at least talk about that, Mr. Chairman, which is what Mr. Hale did in the beginning when he was told, there wasn't enough open space, etc. Ashley's correct. Nobody told him to build a 6-story building, but the reality was when he went to get more open space, he needed to get units by making the buildings higher. So there was a kind of a quid pro quo. No one told him on the board, make the building 6-story. So he went to his technical people and he said, how do I get the units? The architects, we said, we can do this. As engineers can do this. So I think where we are right now is a decision by the board is, do we want to discuss the waivers? What waivers the board is willing to grant? If we can't compromise the waivers, then we need to go down the economic discussion. And if we go down the economic discussion, we do the economic analysis. I'm sure Amy will tell you that you have a right to, hire an economic, person to do your review. When it's all said and done, if it's uneconomic, then the board has to grant the waivers, including 6 stories, if it's proven to be that. And if it isn't, then, we can see where the economics fall. So that's a choice the board has to make. All these other discussions are kind of going circular right now. I was sincerely hoping, I think as Mr. Hale said, but until, the board makes a decision, they're not bound to do anything. I agree. I was hoping that we were working towards that compromise. So I just need direction from the board as to what you want to do. So that's kind of where it is. I respect, and I know you have a tough job, but I think we have to make that decision. Can we compromise the waivers, in the entire decision? Okay, which includes the contribution we've been asked to make, which we don't think we're obligated to make for the intersection. Or do we just continue this conversation? And if we do, then I think the best way to handle it is by the numbers. And if the numbers turn out for the developer, so be it. And if they don't turn out for the developer, so be it. And we wind up with a formula as to what we can and can't do. Not just these ideas, it'll be a 2-story building or a 6-story building. So okay.
I understand what you're saying. You already said this earlier in the meeting. What we're doing now is we're giving the residents of Walpole a chance to bring up any issues. And I know we've been at this for over 2 hours now, but we're going to go through a couple more people, and then I want to get guidance from town council on this. So, thank you. Okay. Ashley, who else do we have from Walpole that wants, or any place that wants to speak?
Okay, so we'll go through. So Bill Hamilton.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Sure can. Yep.
Okay, I just want to point out one thing about snow melt. It is the source of our water supply. And in this environmentally sensitive area, it is necessary to protect the aquifer. And it is this aquifer that provides water to the School Meadowbrook well field. And I don't believe that HAC will I think they will think twice before they take the risk of causing the risks to Walpole's School Meadowbrook well field water supply. And the reason I say that is because it is imperative that the zoning board of appeals stay strong and not allow any more than 15% impervious in this very environmentally sensitive area, because snow melt is the primary source of our water supply. In years of low snow and rain, we don't get the recharge because rain is used by vegetation. So it's very essential that no waiver be granted for more than 15% impervious. And just one last thing, I'm very unhappy, and my neighbors are too, that the capacity in the sewer that we paid for is going to be used by this project. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Erica Burden.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak again. I do have a question, but wanted to make a quick statement. I felt it was insulting for Mr. Hale to have commented that we have spent so much of our time watching ZBA meetings, writing letters, having countless discussions with every department in town, and dissecting 40B law when we are not experts. We are residents that have children and jobs. To imply that we are doing this simply because we don't like change is insulting. So I wanted to say thank you to the zoning board for listening to us and hearing our concerns. We know that you are actually taking them into consideration, even though it seems like Mr. Hale is not. This project will not have limited impact, and that's where we differ in our opinions. I do have a question regarding the site on the buildings. Will abutters, especially the ones that are really close, like the Muller property, will they be able to see the high-rise buildings?
So, I don't know what the exact topography is. Sean Reardon, you've been quiet this evening. You're the peer review for engineering. What's your, I mean, first off, seeing a building is not a problem. You know, a lot of us see our neighbors' buildings and things like that. But you know, Sean, do you want to answer? Do you think you can answer her question, or does it even matter?
No, I think I can try to answer the question. Whether it's compelling enough, I'll leave that to be what it is. The higher the 2 6-story buildings are at the most remote location from the entrance. So I'm pretty comfortable. I don't know how much tree clearing is going to happen, but I think the lines of sight, you're not going to be able to see all the way through to the buildings from Summer Street. The Mullers, who are the closest homes, I'm sure they're certainly going to be able to see the homes that are near them. Whether their view of the buildings is obscured by the trees nearest to their house, that's kind of difficult to see. But these buildings are several hundred feet away from the nearest abutters. So the line of sight is a very shallow sight. The site itself is very low. That's why it's so close to the swamp. So there are no high points that it's going to elevate those buildings around the surrounding landscape. So my instincts tell me that if there's any visibility of the buildings, it's going to be very limited, only through a particular line of sight.
Okay, thank you. For me, it wasn't, I probably should have clarified, it wasn't only a site issue, it's a privacy issue. So when you buy a home, you know, near the beautiful wetlands and you're staring at trees every day and animals and birds, and then now you buy your pool and you're staring into a 6-story complex and watching people doing whatever they're doing, or they're watching you. I mean, that makes a big impact on the abutters, and I just wasn't sure how far away these buildings would be, so that's why I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Okay, Ashley, who else do we have?
So, Andrea Black.
Yeah, so I had made the comment earlier about the black and white of the waiver speaking for themselves, and I just wanted to add that on the note of being disingenuous, I want the board to take into consideration that Mr. Hale keeps saying that he has made compromises, when in reality I don't think that he has. A reduction in the amount of buildings makes no difference when you are then just squishing everything in and making it taller. So you didn't really reduce anything, you just reconfigured he just reconfigured the way that the buildings were running. And so I just think you should take that into consideration, that, you know, the bleeding heart of compromise, it's, to the residents, it's disingenuous.
Okay, thank you, Andrea Black.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sure, Mr. Hill.
When the board hired architectural peer review, not one single time, not one word was said about the density or the number of units. Every single comment was couched in terms of open space and the quality of life for the residents that are going to live here. Not one word. If the board had said directly back then, this is an issue of number of units, I could have responded to that. That's not what happened. Since then, I've spent a giant amount of money. There's not a single abutter that's within 1,000 feet of these tall buildings. No one is going to see it. On each floor that you're asking me to eliminate, 60% of the units are one-bedroom units. The rest are 2-bedroom units. You're talking about 0.2 kids per 2-bedroom units. I don't understand. You know, you're talking about an imperceptible difference in the amount of traffic. So I take umbrage at the point that I haven't been willing to compromise. Nobody asked me in October or September, when we really started meeting again, to reduce the number of units. It was all in terms of architectural stuff that may or may not have been really relevant. But that, you know, since then, in good faith, I've addressed those issues. And there hasn't been any zero. When the fire department says that there's their staff could be stretched, that's a comment that should be made to the finance committee of the Board of Selectmen. It's a fiscal consideration. On the night of the opening hearings, I tried to present the fact that this was going to be a cash cow for the benefits, for the community. And I was admonished and said, fiscal considerations are not part of this hearing. So the police department's, the fire department's comment was a fiscal comment. It had nothing, zero, to do with safety. It was a fiscal comment. There are no safety issues identified by the fire department. And I was not asked to compromise about the number of units. In the last few hearings, it's come up after I've made really good faith efforts to design a project that I am very proud of. Very proud of. You know, there's a lot of people that want to live in a building with an elevator and parking underneath. The world is better off if we use less land to house people. I have all these views. The public has different views. The truth is, you need to think about health, safety, and environmental issues, and we need to come to some sort of a compromise and come to a conclusion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Mr. Hale. And okay, Ashley, is there somebody else that wants to address the board?
I was waiting for hands to raise, but I don't see any hands being raised.
Okay, and that's, I would expect that. We've been at this for quite a bit tonight, and a lot of the things that we even heard tonight, we've gone over before. Okay, Town Council, where do you feel we are in the process right now as far as, you know, we've expressed concerns about the heights of the buildings. One of the things that, you know, this has always been an issue, I think, for the board. And what do you need from us at this point, or how do you recommend that we proceed?
Well, I think that there's a couple things. Before we get to the height, the applicant has submitted new plans with regard to driveway B to satisfy some of the fire department's concerns. So I think we got those today, Mr. Hale, maybe Friday?
They were sent in Friday, but after town hall closed. So we got, technically, they got them today, but
yeah. So they're looking at those. So we still have that. That will change at least one of the findings that you know, one of the draft findings. So we do have some changes that we're looking at. And then, you know, with regard to the height, we you know, I'm very comfortable in you know, drafting a decision that calls for less than 6 stories. It appears that that all 5 members are not happy with 6 stories. So you know, I have direction that way. I just don't know. I guess I don't have a lot of direction between 4 stories, 5 stories. So I think that's where we might be.
Okay. So one of the things, and I just crunched the numbers, you know, again, I don't want to make the development uneconomic, and with the reduction down to 5 stories, which that would be I believe, loss of 32 units, and reduction down to 4 stories would be a loss of obviously 64 units, double it. And I think that, you know, we have a decent decision here, and understanding the rules of 40B are not in the zoning board's favor. I mean, I'll just come out and say that.
Yes.
And at least I'd be comfortable with a reduction of down to five stories. And you know, I don't know. I know other board members might feel any reduction is bad, but I'm also looking at how does this all play out under the rules of 40B, and I ask that the public understand that this isn't regular zoning. This is 40B. This is a state law. It's not a town law. It's a state law, and people have vented to me saying things, and I ask them, talk to your state representative, talk to your senator, because they're the ones that are going to make the difference on this. So, you know, the zoning board is trying to do the best to provide for the neighbors and for the community in Walpole and for the developer to create affordable housing. So that's the situation we're in. Okay, that being said, and I see a few heads shaking, other board members, where do you feel you're at on this? Go ahead, Jane Coffey.
Well, I guess where I'm coming from is not that much different than when I said at the beginning of the meeting. We've heard a lot of discussion here tonight about the jurisdiction we have, if you will, over this or that or whatever. But one thing I have heard, and I keep in the back of my mind, I don't think the zoning board needs to be feel as though we are backed into a corner, that we have to make a decision under duress, because if we don't do X, Y, Z, it's going to go to the housing. And you know what? If it goes to the housing, so be it. Now, Mr. Murphy said from the outset of this meeting, rather, that he's seen cases where it has gone to the housing authority and up to the courts, and the decisions of local zoning have been upheld. Now, this doesn't mean that I think we can buck every single tide, thinking, well, they're going to a court or the zoning authority are going to necessarily agree with everything we say. But I really and truly, in my heart of hearts, have a lot of difficulty with feeling as though we're going to be pushed into something, because if we don't, it's going to happen anyway. Well, you know what? When it comes to safety, as far as I see it, if somebody, if I feel, or this board is so inclined to feel, it's not safe for this many, let it go to the housing. And if the housing says so be it, if you will, it's on them if it's a safety issue. Because to me, a bird is a bird is a bird, a dog is a dog is a dog, no matter what you call it. The getting in is one thing. And as Suzanne said, coming out that exit, the second one was done. Yes, it was done because we asked and they acquiesced and they did it. It's got a board across it, or it's somehow or other locked. Well, to me, if it's locked, it's not easily accessible, get in and get out. It's still one way in. So no matter, and I'm sorry I feel this way, but I'm not against affordable housing. I'd be happy if they just could do it without these multiple dwellings, period. But I just feel as though it's far too dense in an area where the access is far too narrow, and I just don't think it's safe. So if you're asking whether I would like 4 stories or 5 stories or 6 stories, it doesn't matter to me. I just think it's too.
Okay, thank you, Jane, and always value your comments and opinion. Other board members? Suzanne, go ahead.
This project is awful for the South Walpole people. My heart goes out to them totally. It is going to totally impact their lives forever, in not a good way. I know Mr. Hill thinks he's got a nice little community coming in. These people are not going to be able to drive around very well. The school, I know I'm not supposed to bring up the school, but it is going to impact the school. We will have teachers for them. That will be fine. We can teach the kids. It's just, I feel bad that you have zero compassion for these people in this town. It's like you took a dot and you found, oh, Walpole, yeah, let's go find those people. And ruin their lives. And it's going to be very hard for them to adjust. I know you're coming anyway. I realize that. It just breaks my heart for them. That's from my heart. I'm just speaking. The other aspect of it is I am willing to go 5 stories. Not because I want to, because I'm feeling we are pushed against a wall with a knife to our throat. That's how I feel. But I am willing to go 5 stories. I feel a skyscraper in the middle of a pig farm or whatever used to be there is pretty sad that you're doing that to this town, but I guess that's the way you make your money, and you can sleep at night, you go. I am game for 5 stories, though. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. You can go to mute. Bob Fitzgerald, do you have anything on this?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, I think tonight is sort of exemplary of the 40B challenge that we all face as communities, not just Walpole, but everywhere. You know, the safety issues are a concern to me. The fire department has mentioned the challenge to responding to fires in the 6-story buildings. They've also mentioned the length of the drive, which far exceeds what would be, and indicated that they would not be in favor of granting waivers given the related to the distance to these units. So I have concerns about that I think are real. I too feel for the people in South Walpole that have been so dedicated to attending these meetings, giving us their very valuable input and heartfelt feelings about the impacts, because the traffic in particular is not going to be great. I just don't see any way around that, whether it's reconfigured and improved with signalization to the detriment of the historic aspects of the South Walpole Common there, is also a concern of mine. And I think as a board member, I'm trying to focus on those things that are within our bailiwick. Things about the historic nature of the South Walpole Common are probably, could be raised perhaps with the Mass Historic Commission to the extent that they have any role there. And it's not really something for this board, unfortunately, to really consider without being at risk of being challenged at the HAC on that. There are other issues that have been raised regarding the train lines, and the META has certain rules about being within certain distances from their operating tracks and needing licenses to be within certain distances. Again, state law issue, not something that the board can weigh in on, but doesn't mean it is a non-issue that perhaps some other entity could be looking at. So as I look at it from the board's perspective, and from, I think we have sort of 2 choices. I think we could recommend or come to a conclusion that we might support a 5-story building for the multifamily units in the effort to reach it, and see if that brings us to a compromise, or if we want to go to a 4-story building. I think we're inviting either discussion about the economic effect of dropping it 2 stories, in which case we're at risk of an appeal and I agree with Jane that every decision we make is subject to appeal, and if there were reasonable grounds, if we had no reasonable grounds to issue our decisions, then people should take us to court. I mean, that's just the way that it works, and we're doing our best to evaluate all the information and come to a reasoned judgment on these things. So I think the choice for us as a board tonight, I'm just speaking for myself, is to sort of encourage a discussion about the economics of 2 4-story buildings, or to settle on 5 stories and see if that will sort of resolve the height waiver issue. And in terms of the other issue that I think was brought up earlier about our authority to grant a use variance and things of that nature, it struck me as just an argument that there are 2 conflicting state statutes, one that says You know, unless the bylaw says that you can grant a use variance, you can't. That's a state law requirement. The other being 40B, saying that you have to grant waivers. And so that might be a legal argument. I don't know one way or the other, but that's not I don't think that's something that the board can resolve here. We're not really a state court to resolve state law disputes, and that might be an issue on appeal if somebody wants to take an appeal. But I don't want to get sidetracked from that. So anyway, kind of just going on, I think though, to kind of boil it down, I think we're down to the brass tacks on the either four stories and an economic analysis, or 5 in an attempt to get consensus. And I guess I'm of two minds about that. So I don't know if the board wants to discuss those two options and then further before deciding which way we want to go.
Okay, I think I just made a note that we can discuss that, but first I want to hear from Drew Delaney. Drew, your thoughts at this point?
I can't speak much more clearly than I think Bob did, as well as Jane and Suzanne, and feeling the compassion for the abutters of this project. As an abutter of a 40B myself, it's a tough pill to swallow. So I think that Bob put it very clearly, and as far as the 4 stories and reviewing the economic impact of the project, or looking at potential reduction just to 5 stories, but either way, we have a lot of information to review, and the density of the project is certainly not going to be easy to look past. So that's all I have to add at this time, Chairman Lee.
Okay, thank you, Drew. Amy Questle, you've heard where the board's at.
Yep.
We still need the final comments from the fire department. And I'm just going to throw this out there. Are we at a point where you as town council can talk to the applicant's attorney and find out where we're at, or do you not what do you recommend?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do need to revise the draft decision that I drafted, for no other reason, but driveway B at least has changed, and so I would like to hear from the fire department on that. So what I would suggest is that I revise the decision, send it over to Developers Council, and then allow them to comment on that decision, get that posted on the website, get that over to the board. And then I think that the next meeting we can start knocking off issues, making decisions. I think that would be the best plan of attack.
Okay, Judy Barrett, I see you shaking your head. How do you advise?
No, I agree with everything Amy just said. Amy, at the appropriate time, if I could just take a look at the decision too. Yeah, I know, we've worked on it, it's great. But no, I think this is helpful. I think it's a little clearer where you folks are. I do think you're heading in a direction that may resolve a number of issues with this, and maybe get the board to a permit that it can live with, and that hopefully the applicant can, which, is kind of where you want to be if you possibly can. So I think you did well. This is hard though. It's hard.
Okay, so, Bob, are you saying something?
Sorry, I just had one other comment. My understanding is that we talked about the 300 units, and it was mentioned about a prior case involving, I guess, a development in Woburn that was much more than that, 600 at the beginning, and then dropped to 400, and the court said no, the board was okay approving the 300. I don't want to I think we need to be pretty clear-eyed about that. There's a provision in the regulations that says, you know, if it's more than 300 units, the board can just decline, you know, reject it as too large of a project. So I don't know that case that was referenced, but I think we should be careful about thinking that, well, if we just cut it down, that there's prior precedent that says we can do that. I think the magic 300 number is there for a reason, and that's why when the board limited it in that case to 300, the courts upheld it. I'm not saying we have to go all the way to 300, and I think that's probably the starting point from a developer's perspective, is to figure out, you know, how big of a project can I get under that cap, and this one happens to be right on the number at 300. And now we're trying to address and it's pretty clear. I think anybody looking at the site plan, given the amount of wetlands and the amount of access ways and the limitations that the site imposes, that those 300 units are packed in there. There's no question about that. But I just wanted, for our own consideration as well as members of the public, to understand that you know, that case that was referenced may not be all that relevant to us.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Okay, so as all these hearings, we have to look at, you know, where are we in the process, and we're coming close to the end. I actually would like to keep it open so we can get the information from the fire department on that, and it also gives town council a chance to talk with the developers council, you know, work out a few more things. Mr. Hale, do you want to continue? I'm thinking 2 weeks, and we should be able to be at the 99% solution at that point.
Yes. So the answer is I don't want to continue, but if you're asking me if I will continue, the answer is yes, and I appreciate it.
Okay, and I think we all feel that way. We've been at this for a while, but we want to get it right. We have only one shot at doing this right, and we want to. We live in Walpole. We're going to be living with this ourselves too. So not just South Walpole, the whole community, as somebody made the point. Okay, so at the request of the applicant, I would like to have the motion to continue this until March 29th at 7 p.m. by Zoom meeting.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Suzanne. Second by Jane. Okay, any further discussion? Okay. Roll call vote on continuing the hearing. Jane Coffey.
Aye.
Suzanne Murphy.
Murphy, aye.
Bob Fitzgerald.
Aye. Sorry.
Drew Delaney.
Aye.
And I'm John Lee. Aye. Okay. So it's continued. We know what we have to do. Town council's going to continue with the plan. With the decision. You can talk with the applicant's attorney on this.
Sure.
We'll have things reviewed by the fire department. Ashley, do you have anything for us?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Judy Barrett, anything that you think we should be doing within the next 2 weeks to move this along? I know you've been with us from the beginning.
I have, and it's been my pleasure. And I think for now, you know, let Amy talk to their council. Let that sort of go into that kind of communication, almost administrative type of communication, and come back and be able to give recommendations to the board. I think that's where you are.
Do we need an extension?
Probably.
Sorry,
yeah.
It occurred to me.
Yeah.
So I voted, you're right, we took a vote to continue the hearing, and what I would like to do is have a motion per the request of the applicant to continue until March 30th. It's just one day beyond the date.
Okay. I'll send a written extension tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And Judy, I'm sorry, Amy Questle, do we need to vote on that, the extension?
No, the applicant, as stated, that he'll give you one.
Yeah.
So we are good. You voted on the continuance, so should be good.
All set.
Okay. And this, so unless some board members have anything else, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for all the people from the Walpole community for being here. I still see there's 37 people out there, so thank you for everybody's input. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, second?
By
Second by
Jane.
Jane Coffey. This does not require a roll call vote. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Carried. Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Night. Thank everybody.